The 2025 NFL Draft quarterback class may not be strong, but that doesn't mean that for Kellen Moore, it's going to be wrong. We got all that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at two quick things, a little bit of a quick show for you. We're going to tell you why the New Orleans Saints don't necessarily have to wait for the draft in order to build out their trenches. We're going to kick everything off with three quarterbacks that I think could work for Kellen Moore in this year's NFL draft. We appreciate you as always, whether it's your first time or your next time, for being here this time, making us your first listen, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Look, I might not be the biggest fan of this quarterback class in the NFL draft, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't evaluate the quarterbacks. It doesn't mean that Kellen Moore isn't a big fan of the NFL draft class at quarterback, and it doesn't mean that the New Orleans Saints won't be taking a quarterback in this year's 2025 NFL draft. So what I wanted to do was spend a little bit of our Saturday bonus episode here taking a look at three quarterbacks that could make sense for Kellen Moore and the New Orleans Saints, and why. The three quarterbacks that we're going to look at today shouldn't really be any surprise. We'll take a look at Ole Miss quarterback Jaxson Dart, Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe, as well as Syracuse quarterback and former Ohio State quarterback Kyle McCord. I want to give you each of their kind of build and why it is that I think that each of them could potentially fit for Kellen Moore. So I want to start off with Jaxson Dart. He's been the most popular name. Some people talking about him potentially leaping up into the first round. I still think that he's kind of a mid to late day two guy, something like that. So getting him in the second round or in the third round could make a lot of sense. You grab a big playmaker at pick number 9 overall, come back in the second round at pick 40, taking Jaxson Dart. I think that's a really good spot for New Orleans. And if you can get him into the third round, even better. 6'2", 225 pounds, participated in this year's Senior Bowl, is a senior. Had a great season last year, led the SEC in passing, 4,279 passing yards with 29 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Very solid job taking care of the ball through an 80.9% catchable pass rate, which was 10th in FBS. So you saw him be able to take care of the football. I think he's probably the most Jalen Hurts-like quarterback in this year's draft out of those that are draftable and make sense about where the New Orleans Saints will be selecting. One of the reasons why I say that is, of course, because you get the mobility with him, you get the build with him at that 6'2", 225, basically a carbon copy of Jalen Hurts, and you get that sort of extra run game floor that raises the floor for these young quarterbacks. 34.2% of passes this season were labeled as wide open passes for Jaxson Dart, according to Jordan Reed over at ESPN. That's going to be something to consider. One of the big knocks on Jaxson Dart is going to be, can he go through progressions? Can he call plays in a huddle? Can he huddle up, which is something he wasn't asked to do very much over the course of his time in Ole Miss. Relay a play call, get everybody to the line, snap the ball, and then be able to survey the field to make the right decision. Because Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, that type of offense is kind of like what we talked about with Hendon Hooker years ago over in Tennessee. With that offense's approach, the scheme opened up the wide receivers and it was a lot of wide open throws. That's kind of the knock that's going to be there on Jaxson Dart as well. So if Kellen Moore can scheme wide receivers open, Jaxson Dart makes a lot of sense in terms of what he could potentially do there. Then, of course, you're developing him a little bit further as a get into the huddle, relay a play call, snap, go out there and make those reads, all those other things. So you're probably looking at somebody that would need some time to develop, coming in, competing with a guy like Spencer Rattler. That's a position that makes sense. Let's take a look next at Jalen Milroe, the Alabama quarterback, 6'2", 225, kind of the same build there. Also expected to be a day two guy. Milroe's somebody that, people are going to look at and say, well, he's known more as a rusher than he is as a passer. 2,844 passing yards last season with just 16 touchdowns to 11 interceptions, but added 726 rushing yards with another 20 rushing touchdowns as well. The fact that Jalen Milroe, too, is you look for the quarterback position, you're trying to find improvement year over year. 2023, he completed 65.8% of his passes, threw for 2,800 yards, 23 touchdowns, so only 6 interceptions. A really solid season in 2023, but didn't back that up in 2024, where he completed a lower percentage of passes, not by much, 64.3%, but again, threw for 2,800 yards, 16 interceptions, 16 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. So took a little bit of a step back. You're usually looking for guys to get better and better and better as the years go on. One of the scouts that Jordan Reed talked to from a quarterback needy team said, quote, "You're going to have to go all in on his skill set and build a scheme that just overwhelms." Kind of like Baltimore is kind of what he mentioned. But there's a pathway to success for him at the next level. One of the big things with him is holding on to the ball 2.86 seconds in terms of time to throw against man coverage, according to Jordan Reed, 40.1 QBR. Not great there. One of the other big things is going to be, and this was a Senior Bowl thing, people wanted to see him take snaps under center. I'm going to be honest with you, I have no idea why. Why put him in a bad situation, knowing that he takes a bunch of snaps at shotgun? Let me tell you what Kellen Moore has done. 2024, 91.7% of Jalen Hurts snaps came from the shotgun. 92.5% of them came in on passing plays. Justin Herbert in 2023, 95.6% of his total snaps came from shotgun. 94.5% of those were passes, or 94.5% of his passes came from shotgun. Dak Prescott, 94.6% of his passing plays in 2022, 98.8% of his passing plays in 2021 all came from the shotgun. I'm not worried if a guy has taken a bunch of shotgun snaps in the NFL, or in college, transitioning to Kellen Moore's NFL system. I think they'll be okay there. And then wrapping this one up, we'll look at Kyle McCord. Depends on where you look, but he ranges anywhere from 6'1" to 6'3", and ranges anywhere from 200 to 220 plus pounds. So we'll see at the combine what he actually comes in as. Senior, so he's got that experience. Expected to be a day 2, day 3 selection. Some folks see him potentially going a little bit earlier than that kind of early day 3 range. We'll see where things go. He led college football, 4,779 passing yards, 34 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 5 of those interceptions coming in one game against Pittsburgh, an absolute meltdown of a game. But outside of that, gets the ball out quickly, 2.46 seconds, completed 36 of his passes of 20 or more air yards. That is huge. That led the FBS as well. So you see the big time downfield. He improved every single year. And then the biggest thing now is just kind of ball placement. Operates in structure, not somebody that's super mobile. So he would fit a little bit more of the, I want to be careful about how I say this. He would fit a little bit more of the Justin Herbert and Dak Prescott mold. I know. Both of those guys can move. I understand. But those guys like to operate in structure a little bit more. For instance, Dak Prescott hovered around 30 to 40 rushing attempts during his time with Kellen Moore. Justin Herbert hovered around 40 to 50 rushing attempts, or really, actually, the 1 year with him had about 40 or 50 rushing attempts. Jalen Hurts last year had 150 rushing attempts. That's what I mean. It's not that guy. It's closer to those guys, a little bit closer to the Derek Carr type of, somebody that on even his most active rushing years was rushing for maybe 30 attempts. So that's probably what you would get from a Kyle McCord. Not too terribly dissimilar than some of Kellen Moore's years with Dak Prescott. So that's what you're looking for when it comes to these three. I think those are the 3 quarterbacks that make the most sense. There's other guys, Will Howard, who doesn't really pump in a lot of confidence, but we'll see. Riley Leonard, a little bit more of too much of a runner for me. Not really somebody that you can rely on as a passer, in my opinion. And so there's some of those guys. But outside of that, I think it's Jaxson Dart, maybe Jalen Milroe, and Kyle McCord that are going to be the biggest names that could potentially be fits for Kellen Moore at the quarterback position. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints don't need to worry about quarterback at pick 9. It sounds like Kellen Moore may want to focus on building the trenches, but he doesn't necessarily have to do that in the first round either. Let me explain why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. As the NBA games tip off, you can get in on all of the action over at FanDuel. Even if you miss tip-off, actually, because of their live betting, you can bet on fourth quarter comebacks. You can still get into who's going to win the quarter, go quarter by quarter. There's a ton of fun stuff that you can do over at FanDuel. Even with All-Star Weekend here, you can bet on 3-point favorite for later on today. and much more. Dame right now, Dame Dollar is set to be the favorite there, so you can get in on that and much more. And it's even more fun if you're a new customer, because right now new customers over at FanDuel.com can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. All you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com today to get started. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Put $5 down on a heavy favorite. If that $5 bet wins and it's your first, $150 in bonus bets coming your way. Get in on all the action over at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I don't think the New Orleans Saints should wait for the NFL draft to address their offensive line in particular and begin building out their trenches. There's a really solid free agency class, particularly on the offensive side of the trenches. They get some help over on the defensive side as well. Guys like Taylor Tart, some of the other maybe guys that if Brandon Staley becomes defensive coordinator, you could see the team bringing over from Los Angeles. But in particular on the offensive side of the football, which is where I think the game is won or lost for New Orleans as they move forward, I don't think they should wait until the draft to try to address that. A couple reasons why. Oftentimes, like the response to who the Saints should draft at number 9 is kind of treated like that's the entire draft, right? Oh, well, the Saints can't take a wide receiver or a running back or a pass rusher or whatever because they need to build their offensive line. Sure. If that were the only player that they had the opportunity to add over the course of their entire offseason, then yes, I guess you're right. But in this being that that's not the case, and there's a free agency period that precedes the draft, and there's 8 more picks in the draft, it's not necessary for the Saints, who mostly have a need on their interior offensive line, to use a top 10 pick on a guard. I don't think that the Saints have to go that direction. Now, that's assuming that Kellen Moore doesn't come in and say, you know what, I think he's going to be comfortable with Taliesin Fuanga at either left or right tackle. I think that's going to be fine. The big question is he comfortable with Trevor Penning? But considering how much they ran the ball in Philadelphia last year and over in Dallas in years before, I could see them being perfectly comfortable with Trevor Penning moving forward, and then maybe what Brendan Nugent is able to do with that. So the thing that I look at beyond that then is how do you address that guard position? And there's a really good class of guards entering free agency that does not require you to break the bank. So I want to name a couple that I think that the Saints could look at. Mekhi Becton is obviously a name to keep an eye out on. If he does not return to Philadelphia, obviously he would have the connection with Kellen Moore. Now, Mekhi Becton got probably the best year of his career playing in that Kellen Moore offense over with Philadelphia. During his previous stop and stuff like that, where he was drafted and everything, he did not have as much success. It wasn't until he really landed with Kellen Moore in Philadelphia that things shaped up. Remember, he was drafted by the Jets, played 3 years there, and gave up 12 sacks in 2023, gave up 7 sacks his rookie season in 2020, only surrendered 5 sacks in 2024, which for a guard is more than you'd probably like, but his ability to play in the run game was what was tapped into a lot more. And so having Kellen Moore be the guy that Mekhi Becton really saw some career resurgence with, it wouldn't surprise me to see him follow a guy like Kellen Moore to New Orleans. Pro Football Focus has Mekhi Becton's projected contract at 3 years, $27 million total. So about a $9 million average per year. That's just an estimation. And obviously that doesn't actually mean committing $9 million in 2024. You could signing bonus, push things out, all that good stuff. So Mekhi Becton, obviously, maybe a top target, if you ask me, when it comes to what he was able to do with Kellen Moore. The big thing is, who does Becton credit the most for his fantastic boost in 2024? Does he credit Kellen Moore, or does he credit Jeff Stoutland, the offensive line coach in Philly? And if he credits Jeff Stoutland more than he credits the system of Kellen Moore, then there's a good chance that Mekhi Becton stays in Philly. That would then push New Orleans to looking at other potential players out there. And one potential 1-year option could be Kevin Zeitler of the Detroit Lions. This very similar sort of approach and system in terms of like playing to the strengths of your offense and all that kind of stuff is what Ben Johnson did. It's what Kellen Moore does. So a guy like Kevin Zeitler could potentially plug in as a solid option for you in your 1 year as you're developing a second or third round pick, like a Tate Radledge or a Gray Zabel or a Wylam or somebody like that out of West Virginia. There's a lot of options in terms of how you could utilize a guy like Kevin Zeitler, even if he's just brought in as a depth player, right? A veteran depth guy to help push the development of some of the other guys that are ahead of him. His projection on his contract, 1 year, $6.25 million, manageable, very, very manageable. 35 years old by the time that he would join the team, so you'd be wondering about longevity and all those other things. But an 87.2 PFF run blocking grade, if you accept run PFF grades as a thing, that's a cheap but effective player that you could potentially go after, whether as a depth player or as somebody that ends up being a starter for you. One of the other guys that I really like that kind of flies under the radar in these conversations is offensive lineman Patrick Mekhi out of Baltimore. I've talked about him here on the show before, but I think he's a solid player, versatile player as well. He's considered, or his projected contract, 3 years, $20.6 million, so around $8.5 million in that situation. He has played all over the offensive line. He's been somebody for the Baltimore Ravens, which again, strong offensive line there, very run-heavy approach there as well. He mostly was expected to play left guard, but then moved all over the place throughout his time. He's played 500 snaps at both tackle positions as well before even showing up in 2024. And so that ends up having a pretty good kind of James Hurst-like type of impact on a team. And so I think having a James Hurst-like player makes a ton of sense for the New Orleans Saints. Another guy that I'd watch out for just as a potential depth player, I was just looking at the offensive line for that 2023 Kellen Moore Chargers offense. And one guy that's about to become available is Brendan James, Jaimes. So I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. But he's somebody that didn't play a ton, played 155 snaps in 2023, only played 3 snaps last year for the Chargers at center, but has played guard, has played center, all those things. And he could be somebody that, a Cornhuskers guy that has some familiarity with Brendan Nugent, has some familiarity as well with Kellen Moore, and could be brought in as an interior depth option, has played center, has played guard, has been somebody that has been able to kind of move all around in that way. And so I think that because of that, a depth option that can fill in a couple of different places, like there's definitely some interest in all that. And then one other name that I'll mention too is Zach Martin. Again, older guy, 34.2 in terms of his age, according to Pro Football Focus. So he would start the season around 34 years old. 1 year, $7 million. Another guy like Kevin Zeitler that could just be, either a veteran depth option or a potential starter while you develop somebody behind him. Just gives you a little bit of it's more of a Band-Aid approach, if I'm being honest, but an opportunity there for another guy that could be somebody that can contribute to what it is that you're trying to do and trying to build in terms of your trenches here for 2025. So lots of options in the free agency market that you can pair with a later addition in the draft without having to go right away at the beginning of the draft at the position. But if you choose to go for a Will Campbell, fine. You know what I mean? There's other ways to go for sure. So there you go. Lots of names that are very possible for the New Orleans Saints in the draft, at quarterback, and free agency, in the trenches and all that. So I want to continue to break this down. We'll go through some more of this. I want to do this again at defensive tackle in tomorrow's episode for our other bonus episode. So we'll have that for you as we continue on here 7 days a week on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else or on your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Rush Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. Trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.